All right.
My next guest is Vicki Wilson. Vicki is an educator serving children in the field for over 28 years as a teacher and principal. She's passionate about education and strives to make it better every day. She's particularly interested in educator learning, leadership, and organizational change, and progressive and innovative practices in education, which leverage best practices at school to make an improvement so that all students can get the best education possible. Currently, she is a proud principal of Monroe Elementary School in Wyandotte, Michigan. And she is also learning and student centered. This is a student learning and student centered school that values both student and adult collaborative learning. Monroe was named a nationally recognized model PLC school by Solution Tree in 2018. In 2020, Vicki published Lead with Instructional Rounds, Creating a Culture of Professional Learning. And she's also taken place in a few other books, which include in 2021, she was part of the 100 author collaboration that I was also on in the 100 No Nonsense Things That All Teachers Should Stop Doing, and the recently published 100 No Nonsense Things That All Administrators Should Stop Doing, which were published by Pushing Boundaries Consulting. Vicki enjoys connecting with professional learning network through Twitter chats, blogs, and events. She is an author, blogger, and presenter, and she presents and consults around instructional rounds, PLCs, positive behavior supports, and restorative practices, reimagining SROs, stopping the school to prison pipeline. Welcome to the podcast, Vicki.
Hi, Dana. Thank you for having me today.
Well, thanks very much for being on the podcast. Tell me about a time when you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out.
Definitely. I've given that a little bit of thought. When I think of being in the trenches, I think of a hard time, something that I might grow or learn a lot from, or something that changes me as a person. And I've got a couple examples. One being early on in my leadership career, and one being more recent. So I'll start with when I first became a principal. I was a principal I became a principal at the school that I had been teaching at for 3 years prior to that. And it was such a special view, I would say, as I started to go into classrooms for the first time as a leader to look at teaching and learning, and was able to go into classrooms of the people that I had been a teacher with for a few years. So it gave me just an interesting perspective of seeing those that I had worked with and watching them teach and work with their students. And it was something that I hadn't done before. So unfortunately, I realized the great benefit of being a fly on the wall in their classrooms. So however, shortly after I became that principal, we found that we were going to close our elementary school, and due to declining enrollment, and then merge with another elementary school in our district that was nearby. And so that was a pretty tough time. I knew it would be tough, any kind of school merger is. But as we started going through it and coming together, I realized that we were two very different schools that operated very differently, different cultures, different mode of operation. And that was definitely a time in the trenches, trying to lead these two teams to come together. It was a struggle for each group to unify and to even learn to appreciate each other. So that was definitely a time in the trenches that took probably a few years to really get out of it and help each school see what all of their colleagues had to offer and to come together and create one unified school.
And you also learned a lot about leading change around restorative practices. Sometimes, as a new instructional leader, teachers might react negatively to different styles of discipline or different initiatives. So how was that kind of a trench story for you as you became a leader at that school that merged?
Um, that was also a difficult time too. I've been a principal now for 16 years, and we've seen a shift from a more traditional disciplinary approach to moving into restorative practices. So that was a tough time in that it's hard for teachers and leaders and parents to um, shift from that consequence or punishment based approach to a support and relationship based approach. So um, I think that one of the strategies we used, I would say in both, like in the school merger, in trying to grow our capacity around student support and a change of approach to behavior, was to get into each other's classrooms. And when I became a leader, that was a priority for me.
Mm-hmm.
How do I grow and break down these barriers and help our teachers come together and unify under a common philosophy and approach? And what we ended up doing was getting teachers into each other's classrooms, but we wanted to do it in a non-threatening way, where we're actually looking at what are the positive things that are happening. This was really effective in the merger when we had two different schools, I would have to say, coming together that may not have appreciated each other in the beginning. And as I could take a group of teachers and go into a classroom for the purpose of looking at what's positive that's happening, what are the strengths that this teacher has that's a research-based best practice, and what impact is that having on their students and their learning. And when we could get our teachers seeing that from their colleagues, it really broke down those barriers. We were able to highlight positive relationship building skills that were happening in classrooms, ways that teachers can support students in a way that impacted student learning. So it's really the work that I wrote about in Lead with Instructional Rounds, is taking teachers into each other's classrooms to look at the positives rather than deficits that are
Mm-hmm.
happening. What are the strengths and how can we learn from each other, so that instead of looking at what's wrong and how we can fix it, we're actually looking at what's right and how do we grow that and share that and validate the work that we're doing and honoring each other. And that really did break down the walls and help
Mm-hmm.
us to come together and learn together about best practices.
Mm-hmm. So tell me a little bit about the book, Lead with Instructional Rounds, Creating a Culture of Professional Learning. So was this something that's based on kind of evidence that you collected over a number of years? And one of my big questions is, like, a lot of the time people want to do this and get teachers in other teachers' classrooms, but it's all about like coverage, right? It's, do we have funding for subs, or how are we going to make this happen logistically?
Absolutely. The in the book Lead with Instructional Rounds, it really starts with the story of the school closure
Mhm.
and the impact that had on the
Okay.
staff of both schools. That trench story is in there, and then how we use this approach to overcome the differences and to come together and create one unified new school that was different
Mhm.
than each identity of the two separate schools. Um, Throughout the book, though, I tie in a lot of research around Hattie's work and Marzano's work about reflective practices. And it does change the script a little bit around instructional rounds. And what I mean by that, it changes it from that deficit approach to that strength approach. So we are going in to look at um, what is happening well in this classroom that's having a positive impact on student learning. And then we step out and then have a collegial conversation about those practices and how
Mhm.
we can grow those in our own classrooms. you're right, though it is quite there are some logistical challenges, and I would say now more than ever. There's also opportunities now more than ever. One of the challenges is the subs and the coverage. And even if you have the funding, there's a chapter around there about funding and how to go through some of those obstacles of sub coverage. I think that one of the strategies that we use is we plan them all in advance. At my school, we do them once a month. Some schools do them quarterly. So it's really arranging ahead of time to find that coverage. We'll also ask for a full day sub, even if we're not going in classrooms from 8 to 3 the whole time, but we use that time also to release teams for professional learning community work, to do mentoring. So if we can take a day and get a few subs in the building, we can knock off a lot of our school improvement goals with the different parts of the day. So that's been a strategy that's been helpful. And all of this is school improvement related. So we are a Title I school, but where I am right now, so we're able to tie it to some of those fundings too, as far as the funding piece for the substitute teachers. There's also opportunities in this now, and I think more than ever, one of the challenges for schools and for educators and teachers are it's really hard to be a teacher right now. And I feel like teachers and leaders are fielding a lot of criticism, not always loving the job. It's real hard. We've gone through major changes. And one of the things that I notice about instructional rounds is it is a way to bring that joy, that celebration, and that validation back to the work that we're doing. We so often exist in the isolation of our individual classrooms, and we're in there from 8 to 3. We step out for lunch, and then we're back in there, and we don't always see the big picture or celebrate the impact that is happening around learning around our whole school. So my favorite part about it is it really does bring joy back into the profession, not only validating ourselves as educators, but also celebrating and validating those that we're working with.
Yeah, and I think having kind of a guide as to how to make this happen. I mean, I've been in a few schools that try to use this model, maybe not consistently, but a couple times a year where you're observing other teachers. But for those who really want to implement it, as you say, maybe monthly or bi-monthly, as part of the school improvement, it's definitely worth checking out how you went about it, kind of as a result of that school merger. Tell me also about your chapters in the No Nonsense book, starting with the 100 no nonsense things that all teachers should stop doing.
Yeah, that chapter really takes us back a little bit to the restorative practice piece that we started talking about. The chapter is titled Stop Punishing Students Without Listening to Their Side of the Story. I think it's a good reminder that we all enter any kind of situation with our own story and our own perspective and our own experiences. Yeah, it's really important to listen to what was going on with the student, what they were thinking when the situation happened. What are they thinking about now? How can they make it right? So hearing their side of the story often gives us a whole different perspective of what was going on. In that chapter, I write about a story that I had some students that were sent to the office during recess time for throwing some rocks, and someone got hurt. And when it was presented to me, it was a bullying situation, and this kid's always throwing rocks at this kid. And as I have this conversation with all of our students that were involved in it, I realized that there was something very innocent and not intentional to do any harm going on. And it was an insightful story to me because, the story that was told as these kids came down to the office, and the story that I learned from them was very different. And I think that we can start to see things from their perspective and realize that intentions behind mistakes that students make at school may not be what we thought that they
Mm-hmm.
were.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so important to remember, really kind of getting to the bottom of what's going on. And sometimes it's hard for the younger ones to really articulate also what's happened. I've worked with kids of all ages, and I worked last year with the younger ones, and it's really, asking a lot of questions, right? And then making sure they feel safe, and then they can share, because it does have to do with bullying a lot of the time as well, and being afraid of how peers are going to react and those types of things. So you also wrote a chapter in the 100 No Nonsense things that all administrators should stop doing. And what was the chapter you wrote there?
In that book, I wrote a chapter titled Stop Ignoring Feedback of Any Kind from Anyone. And, I think it's important as a leader, like you're serving so many different groups of people. You're serving
Mm-hmm.
your students, you're serving your staff, um, your custodians, your parents. And it's really important to understand all the lenses that people are bringing as they come into your school, and for them to be able to know that they can approach you and share feedback with you, and that you'll take that time to listen and understand perspectives. I feel like so much of the role of the leader is just flipping through the lenses of all the people that you're working with and understanding views and lenses and perspectives before being able to move forward with decision making or even execution of new practices and um, the things that you're going to put on your meeting agendas and the learning that you're going to do is understanding all those perspectives. And you need to be open to taking that feedback and learning from it and understanding it.
Yeah, it's so important to realize that when you know people may come to the school and not know all the information, and they heard something through their student or through media, social media especially. That's really taking the time to listen. That's what I've learned in administration is people might come with they're irate sometimes, or at least really having a lot of questions, and just really about valuing what they have to say, and being that listening ear goes a long way. So,
You're right. And I think valuing it is a
mhm,
great way to phrase it, because many times you got to remember that it takes courage sometimes to go to the school leader to share a perspective and a story,
mhm.
especially if the feedback you want to share is critical feedback. So I always try to remember that. Like for some people, it takes a lot of courage to come and tell me something that they want me to know.
So let's talk a little bit about your consulting. So after this school year, you'll be consulting full time. So talk about some of the things that you are able to present on and work with schools on, such as strengths-based instructional rounds and school leadership mentoring. And also talk to me about your availability after the school year's over.
Thank you. Yeah, you're right, Dana. I have decided to kind of retire, rewire a little bit. So leave the principal role and start Vicki Wilson Consulting. My two, I would say, passion areas are the lead with instructional rounds packages that I can offer to schools. That's where my heart is drawing me to right
Mhm.
now. And my goal is to support schools all over with this work, not just in Michigan, but anywhere, and to grow this strength-based approach
Mhm.
to recognize the positive work we're doing and to grow all those in our building through it. I have designed some packages for schools that could be anywhere from just a couple days working with a school on growing this work to extending that more and doing coaching with the facilitator as they are executing the instructional rounds. So typically it would look like spending a whole day with the school and doing a deep dive around the work of Lead with Instructional Rounds with a leadership team or a task force. And in that work, we would also write that school's playbook for executing their instructional rounds. Followed by then another day that's all staff kickoff to build enthusiasm and understanding around instructional rounds and try to reduce the apprehension that can come with it. Really press forward that this is about validating, celebrating, and growing our practices with each other. And then after that, I would offer coaching days where I would go and work specifically more with the facilitator at that point to compose some really strong, open-ended reflection questions after a classroom observation that would guide dialogue around best practice based on a strength that we saw in the so depending on how many days they want to do it, a package typically would look like either the 2 days plus 1 day of coaching or up to 4 days of coaching.
Okay.
And then I also, another passion I have is just working with leaders. So leadership mentoring and coaching, which can be face-to-face or virtual or a blend of a little bit of each.
Are you currently doing some leadership mentoring with maybe newer leaders in your district or area in Michigan?
Yes, I recently started doing that through our professional organization in Michigan, Michigan Elementary and Middle School Principals Association. So through MEPSA, I am, which is an excellent organization. I am doing some mentoring with leaders and really like their philosophy. It's, that all leaders can use a support, a guide on the side. So their approach is it's not necessarily just for new leaders, but seasoned leaders, experienced leaders, just to have someone to consult and coach with. So.
Yeah, it's so great to hear when people decide to go to full-time consulting to also lend some of their expertise to leaders who need a coach, because that is a very isolated profession. I've been working in a mastermind for about 4 years, both individually and with a group, but it's just having that perspective of other people, right? That might not be in your area or district, right? And that you can just lay any concerns out and you're not judged. So I think it's really, really great.
Yeah, it sure is.
So we've
It's
talked.
definitely very isolating, as you said.
Yeah,
I'm
definitely.
sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Yeah. So the more and more people that are out there able to serve as coaches for leaders, the better, because I think we have a lot of instructional coaches in schools for teachers. Not every school has one, but we often have those, mentor teachers or lead teachers or veteran teachers that will help the newer teachers. But new leaders, APs, or principals don't always have that person who isn't their boss, right? as somebody to lean on. So we've talked a lot about your writing today, your experience with the school merger, and your experience with the instructional rounds. Can you tell me one thing you'd like listeners to remember from everything we've talked about?
Yeah, definitely. The one thing I'd like people to remember from our podcast today is that I think there's a great opportunity to grow and learn from strengths, the strengths that we bring to the profession and the strengths that others bring to the profession. And I just see value in highlighting strengths over deficits, or what's going wrong. I feel like there's plenty of criticism out there right now all over the field of education. And I'd like to see that change and really highlight the positive things that are happening and use those as our growth opportunities.
Great, great. Yeah, that's so important because I think the more we're able to talk up the strengths and help people develop based on their strengths, the more people we're able to keep in the field as well, because we've had a lot of turnover in the past couple of years. So have them grow, and not be too critical. I mean, there's things that people can always improve upon, but have that strengths based approach. Where can people connect with you and find you online?
I'm active on Twitter. My Twitter handle is at Vicki L. Wilson 5. And I also have a website, so you can connect to me via email, Twitter, everything all through that website. It probably is a little easier to remember, and that's just VickiWilson.org.
Great. I'll make sure to put that in the show notes. Well, thank you so much for being my guest on the Out of the Trenches podcast today. It was a pleasure having you on.
Thank you, Dana. It was a pleasure to talk with you today.